In the year 2473, humanity had reached the stars, colonizing distant planets and thriving on the frontiers of space. Yet, for all their technological advancement, there was still one mystery that eluded them: the vast, uncharted reaches of the universe, and the knowledge that could lie beyond. It was on a quiet day in the heart of Earth's scientific network when the discovery was made. A strange signal, one unlike anything recorded in the galaxy, was detected by a deep space probe sent to map the void beyond known space. It pulsed at a frequency that seemed to warp spacetime itself, an echo that couldn't be explained by natural forces. The signal was not random. It was a message, meticulously encoded in a sequence of patterns that defied any earthly logic. This was no accident. It was as if the universe itself was beckoning to them, offering answers to questions no one had dared ask. Dr. Amara Singh, head of Earth's Interstellar Communications Initiative, quickly mobilized a team of scientists to study the anomaly. What they found was a series of interwoven frequencies that defied everything they knew about physics. There were hints of mathematics beyond human comprehension, patterns too complex for any human mind to decipher in full. At the heart of the signal was a location, a coordinate that pointed to the very edge of the Milky Way, beyond any human settlement, far beyond known space. Earth's leaders were divided. Some argued the signal was an invitation, a gift from an ancient, advanced civilization, while others believed it was a warning, perhaps the last cry of a species lost to time. But one thing was certain: it was a call to action. The Council of Exploration, a coalition of Earth's most powerful spacefaring nations, voted in favor of sending an expedition. Captain Elena Diaz, a decorated officer and veteran of countless deep space missions, was chosen to lead the mission. Her reputation for calm under pressure, along with her thirst for discovery, made her the perfect candidate to command Elysium, a ship designed for long-duration space travel. Diaz was no stranger to the unknown, having led successful missions to the farthest reaches of human space, but this was different. This was something no one had ever encountered before. The crew of Elysium was a diverse group, each selected for their unique expertise. There was Dr. Lucas Brandt, a brilliant astrophysicist whose passion for unraveling the mysteries of space rivaled that of any explorer. Lieutenant Zara Tanner, an experienced navigator with an uncanny ability to find pathways through even the most treacherous regions of space. Engineer Jackson Shaw, a man with hands that could fix anything, and Lieutenant Kalen Voss, a former military strategist, whose tactical acumen was invaluable when things went wrong. Together, they were the best humanity had to offer, and they would face the greatest challenge yet. The journey began without fanfare, as the Elysium left the orbit of Earth's homeworld, carrying the hopes of all humanity with it. As the ship sailed deeper into the black void, the signal grew stronger, pulsing steadily, as if guiding them. Each passing day brought them closer to their destination, but also to the unknown dangers that awaited them. The crew felt the weight of their mission. This wasn't just about exploring the stars. This was about answering a question that had haunted humanity for centuries: were they truly alone in the universe? And if not, what other secrets lay waiting for them in the infinite dark? Days turned into weeks, and the crew remained on high alert. There was a tension in the air, an unspoken fear that they might be heading into a trap. But Captain Diaz was resolute. They had come this far, and there was no turning back now. As the signal continued to guide them, she knew that the answers to the universe's deepest questions were within reach, if they were willing to face what lay ahead. The journey into the unknown stretched on, and the crew of the Elysium became increasingly aware of the vast emptiness surrounding them. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The distance between them and Earth grew, yet the signal remained a constant presence, a mysterious pulse that seemed to call them forward, like a beacon in the dark. But as they ventured deeper into uncharted space, strange things began to happen. It started with the anomalies. The ship's sensors would glitch, detecting objects that didn't exist. At first, it was dismissed as a malfunction, an error in the ship's intricate systems, but as the days went by, these glitches became more frequent, and their nature began to change. Lieutenant Tanner, the navigator, was the first to notice it. The star maps, which had been so reliable up until now, began to shift, as though the laws of space and time were subtly warping around them. The stars in the distance, once fixed, began to appear to move. The crew grew uneasy. No one could explain what was happening. Dr. Brandt suggested they were encountering some form of cosmic distortion, a region of space where the very fabric of reality itself was unstable. The idea was unsettling, but it made a strange kind of sense. After all, they were heading into a part of space no human had ever explored. Could the signal be originating from a place so distant and mysterious that it warped the laws of physics around it? The tension began to wear on everyone. The crew, usually a well-oiled machine, was beginning to show signs of strain. There were arguments over trivial things, misunderstandings over mission protocols, and moments of silence where no one spoke at all. The sense of isolation began to creep in, and with it, fear. They were chasing something no one could explain, something that might not even exist, but none of them dared voice the thought aloud. The signal, after all, was still there, pulsing faintly in the background of their every action, a reminder that they were on the cusp of something monumental. Then came the dreams. It was subtle at first, just fleeting glimpses of strange symbols and alien landscapes, but soon, the dreams became more vivid, more detailed. Captain Diaz found herself standing in an alien city, surrounded by towering spires made of a material that defied comprehension. In the distance, an ancient figure loomed, watching her with eyes that seemed to pierce her very soul. The dreams felt real, so real that Diaz couldn't shake the sensation that they were somehow connected to the signal. It was as though something was reaching out to her, trying to communicate. And the more she thought about it, the more she wondered if the signal wasn't just a message from another civilization. It was something more, something deeper. As the crew started experiencing similar dreams, Dr. Brandt theorized that the signal might not just be electromagnetic. What if it was something more profound, an energy source capable of affecting the brain, of directly interacting with consciousness? The thought terrified Diaz, but there was no turning back now. They were too far along in their mission, and the signal was drawing them in. She didn't know if it was leading them to something incredible or something catastrophic, but one thing was clear: they had crossed a threshold. There was no turning back. And then, one day, the signal grew louder, clearer. The crew gathered in the observation room as the stars ahead began to shift, aligning into a formation that matched the coordinates they had been given. What they had been chasing was now within their reach, but as they approached, a new sensation washed over them, a deep, unshakable sense of dread. Whatever lay ahead, they were no longer prepared for it. They were chasing the impossible, and soon, they would have to face the consequences. The moment the Elysium arrived at the coordinates, the crew was struck by the sight before them. Floating in the black expanse was a colossal structure, a monolithic shape that seemed to defy all known laws of construction. It hovered silently in space, casting no shadows, its surface smooth and unblemished by the ravages of time. Its proportions were unlike anything the crew had ever seen, so vast that even from their vantage point, the ship seemed a mere speck against it. The structure's design was alien, composed of sleek, flowing lines that curved in ways that felt unnatural to the human eye. It was both beautiful and terrifying, radiating an eerie sense of age and forgotten power. Captain Diaz stood in the observation room, staring at the structure. For a moment, all was still, too still, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. They had arrived at the source of the signal. This was what they had been chasing, and yet, in her gut, a cold sense of dread lingered. She didn't know if they were standing on the precipice of discovery or disaster. "Helm," "Prepare for docking," she ordered, her voice steady despite the storm of uncertainty raging inside her. The crew moved quickly into action, their professionalism kicking in as they made the necessary adjustments. The ship's massive docking bay opened to allow the airlock to connect with the temple-like structure. The crew, suited in their exploration gear, readied themselves for what lay beyond. Tanner, the navigator, had studied the structure's design on the ship's scanners, but there were still so many unknowns. The structure didn't register any energy signatures or signs of life. It was as if it had been abandoned for eons. Once the airlock hissed open, Diaz led the way down the narrow corridor, her boots echoing against the cold metal. The interior of the structure was just as strange as the exterior. The walls were smooth, almost liquid in appearance, constantly shifting and changing in patterns that seemed to have a logic all their own. The air was unnaturally still, heavy with the weight of an ancient past. Yet, there was no dust, no decay. Everything seemed preserved, as though waiting for someone to discover it. They ventured deeper into the heart of the temple, finding room after room filled with arcane symbols and alien technology. The walls were adorned with strange carvings, images of beings who bore no resemblance to anything the crew had encountered. There were depictions of vast cities, of stars being born and dying in the blink of an eye, of galaxies colliding and reforming. It was a history written in symbols, a story too grand and intricate for any human mind to fully comprehend. In one of the largest chambers, they discovered something far more remarkable, a vast repository of knowledge. Rows of crystalline data shards sat neatly arranged on a pedestal, waiting to be accessed. These were not just records, they were memories, thoughts, entire civilizations captured in a form that transcended human understanding. Each shard glowed with a soft light, pulsing in rhythm with the signal they had been following. Dr. Brandt was the first to reach them, his hands trembling as he approached the shards. This is what we've been looking for," he whispered, almost reverently. "It's a library, a living archive of knowledge." But as he touched the first shard, something changed. The air in the room grew thick, and a low hum vibrated through the floor. The walls seemed to shudder, as if the structure itself had come to life. Diaz instinctively stepped back, a shiver running down her spine. The message from the past was awakening, and they were not alone in this place. The temple had been waiting, but now, it seemed, it had begun to respond. As the crew took in their discovery, they failed to notice the shadows moving just beyond the light, lurking in the corners of the chamber. The truth of this place was no longer hidden, and they were about to learn what had been left behind, and what price it had cost those who came before them. The air in the temple grew heavier with each passing moment. The crew stood frozen in the vast chamber, staring at the crystalline data shards that pulsed with an otherworldly energy. The hum that resonated through the walls had become more pronounced, vibrating in their bones, as if the very structure was alive. Captain Diaz's heart raced as she tried to steady her breath. There was something deeply unsettling about the stillness, the silence that had descended upon them. For all the marvels they had uncovered, there was an unspoken truth hanging in the air. This was not just a repository of knowledge, it was something more. Dr. Brandt was the first to speak, his voice barely audible above the hum. "These shards, they're not just records. They're memories." He reached out again, hesitating before touching another one, his fingers trembling. As his hand made contact, the hum intensified, and the light from the shards flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. A sudden surge of energy shot through the room, and the symbols on the walls began to shift, rearranging themselves into new patterns. The air crackled with power, and the temperature dropped sharply, sending a chill through the crew. It was as though something had awakened, something ancient and vast. The crew exchanged nervous glances, but no one dared speak. They were too deep inside this mystery now. Suddenly, the room seemed to shift. The walls, once solid and unmoving, now rippled like liquid. The lights flickered, casting strange, ghostly shadows. The symbols on the walls began to glow, brighter and more erratic, as though they were alive. Diaz stepped forward, her instincts screaming that they were crossing a threshold they had no way of understanding. Then, it happened. The chamber trembled violently, and the ground beneath their feet seemed to ripple, distorting reality itself. A figure, long and slender, materialized in the center of the room. It was not human, nor was it any life form they could recognize. Its shape was fluid, shifting as though it were made of light and shadow, with countless eyes that flickered and blinked in the dark. It spoke, though its voice was not heard through their ears. Instead, the words flooded their minds, an overwhelming rush of knowledge, images, and emotions. "You have come," the voice said, not in words but in understanding, as if it had known them before they knew themselves. "The seekers, the curious. You have found what was hidden." The crew stood frozen, a sense of awe and terror washing over them. Diaz's mind struggled to comprehend what she was seeing. Was this a remnant of the ancient Virak, or was it something even older, even more powerful? The being continued, its form flickering as if it were made of shifting light. "You have awoken the guardians. You are the last of the seekers, and you must choose, knowledge or preservation. One cannot coexist with the other." The words struck Diaz like a physical blow. The air in the room seemed to thicken, pressing in on them. The sense of dread deepened. This was no ordinary discovery. They had unearthed something that should have remained buried, and now it was confronting them with a choice that would decide the fate of not just their mission, but perhaps of humanity itself. Dr. Brandt, visibly shaken, stumbled back, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What do you mean?" he gasped. "What is this place?" "The temple holds all that was, the knowledge of the Virak, of the stars, of the void, but to know it all, it will consume you," the being responded, its voice growing darker, more urgent. "The path you walk will lead to madness or transcendence. There is no middle ground." The crew was now fully aware that they were no longer in control. The temple had awakened, and with it, a force they could not begin to comprehend. The choice that lay before them was not just intellectual, it was existential. Could they resist the temptation to uncover more, or would they fall victim to the very knowledge they sought? As the being's presence intensified, Diaz felt the weight of its gaze upon her. It was asking her to make the impossible decision, and the longer they lingered, the more she felt the pull of the temple's secrets, whispering in her mind, promising a truth so vast it could shatter the limits of human understanding. The being before them shimmered with an eerie light, its presence overwhelming. The crew of the Elysium stood paralyzed by the weight of its words. Captain Diaz felt her mind teetering on the edge of comprehension, unable to fully grasp the magnitude of what the being had said. The choice between knowledge and preservation, it was more than a mere decision. It was a test, one that could reshape humanity's very existence. The voice echoed in her thoughts, relentless and clear. "To seek knowledge is to unravel the fabric of reality. You cannot unlearn what you have discovered," the being warned. Its form flickered, seemingly destabilizing, as if the very essence of the creature was linked to the ancient energy that permeated the temple. "But beware, for the knowledge of the void is not meant for mortal minds. It is a revelation beyond the stars, beyond the bounds of space itself. To understand it fully is to lose your place in the cosmos." Diaz's heart raced. The weight of the decision pressed down on her. What lay within the void? The answers to questions humanity had pondered for centuries. The meaning of existence itself. She could almost feel it, a presence lurking just out of reach, tantalizing in its promise. Dr. Brandt, unable to contain himself, stepped forward. "We came all this way to learn. We can't turn back now. This knowledge, it's why we're here." The being's many eyes seemed to narrow as it observed Dr. Brandt. "Do you understand what you ask? The knowledge within the void is the knowledge of all things, but it is a double-edged sword. It will give you the answers you seek, but it will consume you. twist you into something unrecognizable. Even the Virak, the ones who built this temple, were undone by it. They thought they could master the void. They were wrong. A flash of images burst in Diaz's mind. Alien cities, vast and unyielding, the remnants of a great civilization that had once ruled the stars, now reduced to dust. She saw them, the Virak. Tall, skeletal beings, their once glorious empire now shattered. She felt their anguish, their longing for the knowledge they had unearthed. And then she understood. The temple wasn't just a storehouse of information, it was a warning, a tomb for those who had dared to understand too much. Then why keep it here? Diaz asked, her voice trembling. Why not destroy it if it's so dangerous? The knowledge must remain, the being replied, its voice tinged with sadness. It is the last of the Virak's legacy, a final testament to their hubris. It was left as a test, a gift, and a curse. If you seek the truth, you must face the consequences of knowing it. The void offers no mercy. The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. The crew stood in silence, each one of them grappling with the same question. Could they resist the temptation to know the truth? Captain Diaz felt her thoughts blur, the weight of the decision becoming unbearable. She had always been a seeker, someone driven by the thirst for knowledge, but now, faced with the reality of what that knowledge might cost, she wondered if it was worth the price. The void itself, the empty expanse of the universe, was not just a place. It was a force, a primal void that stretched beyond the boundaries of existence, beyond time and space. It was the ultimate unknown, the source of all creation and destruction, and humanity had been given a glimpse of it, a glimpse that could unravel everything they thought they knew about the universe. Suddenly, the ground trembled, and the being's form flickered erratically, as though the temple itself was reacting to their hesitation. The time to decide has come, it intoned, its voice now a cold, distant whisper. You will either walk the path of the seekers, or you will turn away. The void will not wait forever. Diaz looked at her crew, each of them struggling with the weight of the revelation. What could they do now? The truth was before them, but so was the abyss. She could feel it calling to her, beckoning her into the darkness. But as she stood there, she realized that they had already crossed the point of no return. The choice had already been made the moment they had set foot on this forsaken temple. The tension in the temple reached a breaking point. The walls trembled as the hum of ancient power resonated through the room, sending ripples through the air. Captain Diaz stood at the center of it all, her mind racing. The being before them, the entity that had warned them of the dangers ahead, was growing more insistent. It was as if the very fabric of reality was tightening around them, urging them to make a decision, to choose a path before the moment slipped away forever. The crew stood frozen, each of them caught in their own turmoil. Dr. Brandt had his eyes fixed on the glowing data shards, his hands clenched into fists. He was the first to speak, his voice thick with desire and determination. We can't walk away from this, not after everything we've seen, everything we've learned. This is the greatest discovery in the history of humanity. We can't just leave it here. Diaz turned to face him, her expression hardening. She understood his thirst for knowledge, the unrelenting curiosity that had driven them all to this point, but the cost of that knowledge was clear now. The Virak had been destroyed by their own ambition, and humanity, too, could be consumed if it failed to tread carefully. Dr. Brandt, she said, her voice calm but firm, I know what you're feeling, but this isn't just about discovery anymore. It's about survival. The knowledge in this place could tear us apart, warp our minds, undo everything we are. Her words hung in the air, but Brandt didn't seem to hear them. His eyes were fixed on the data shards, his mind already lost to the temptation. Diaz knew that look. He was beyond reasoning now, entranced by the lure of forbidden knowledge. Lieutenant Tanner stepped forward, her voice a quiet whisper. We came here to explore, to learn. But what if some things are better left unknown? What if we're not meant to understand this? I can feel it, the pull. It's not just the signal that brought us here. It's something else, something ancient, older than us. It wants us to stay, to take more than we're capable of. A long silence followed her words. The crew exchanged uncertain glances. Even Voss, usually steadfast and resolute, seemed shaken. His eyes flicked nervously to the flickering form of the being in the center of the room, its presence growing more insistent, more alien with every passing moment. The being's voice echoed again, cutting through the silence. The path of knowledge leads to power, but power without understanding leads to destruction. You will face a reckoning, and it will come swiftly. The void does not forgive. Diaz turned back to face the being. She knew it wasn't just warning them, it was trying to protect them. The ancient entity, the last remnant of the Virak, had lived through their mistakes. It had seen entire civilizations crumble under the weight of their own understanding. The being was not a guardian of knowledge, but a sentinel, trying to prevent another fall. "We have to leave," Diaz said, her voice resolute. This is not the future we want for humanity. We can't let our curiosity blind us to the cost. Dr. Brandt's eyes flashed with frustration, anger bubbling beneath the surface. "We can't just turn away from this. We've come too far." But Diaz was firm, the weight of command settling on her shoulders. "The cost is too high. We leave now, and we take nothing but the knowledge that some mysteries are better left unsolved." As the crew absorbed her words, the being's form seemed to flicker, as if it were acknowledging their decision. A final warning, or perhaps a gesture of approval. The hum in the air grew louder for a moment, then suddenly faded. The light from the data shards dimmed, and the temple seemed to grow still, as if holding its breath. For a moment, the crew was silent, suspended in a place between the known and the unknown. They had come seeking answers, but now, they understood that some questions could not, and should not, be answered. The final choice had been made. Captain Diaz turned to her crew. "Prepare to leave. We've learned enough." As they made their way back to the Elysium, Diaz couldn't shake the feeling that they had not escaped unscathed. The knowledge they had brushed against would haunt them, but she knew it was the right decision. The universe was vast, and not all truths were meant for humanity to bear. Some doors, once opened, could never be closed again, but this door, this one, would remain sealed. The crew made their way back to the Elysium, with a heavy silence hanging over them. Captain Diaz could feel the weight of the decision they had made pressing down on her, but she couldn't shake the sense of relief that followed their retreat from the temple. As they boarded the ship, she stole one last glance at the dark, monolithic structure that loomed in the distance. It was as though the temple was watching them, waiting, as if it would never truly let them go. Once aboard, the doors to the Elysium closed behind them, sealing them off from the void beyond. But even within the safety of their ship, the tension didn't dissipate. The crew moved in a kind of quiet haste, preparing for departure without speaking much. The hum of the engines began as the ship powered up, preparing to leave the cursed place. Yet, despite the ship's systems kicking into action, something felt off. The usual rhythm of the Elysium, the gentle hum of life support, the smooth engagement of the thrusters, seemed wrong. There was a dissonance in the air, a wrongness that couldn't be pinned down. The ship had been in space long enough for its crew to become attuned to its sounds, its movements, but now, every noise felt amplified, as though something was stirring deep within the ship, something that didn't belong. "Captain," Tanner's voice cut through Diaz's thoughts, "I'm reading something strange. It's coming from the core, it's like a pulse, faint, but there." "What kind of pulse?" Diaz asked, turning to face the officer. "It's not a normal energy signature. I can't explain it, but it's similar to what we felt near the temple," Tanner replied, her voice strained. "Whatever we encountered down there, it's still with us." A shiver ran down Diaz's spine. She'd suspected something like this might happen, but hearing it out loud made it all the more real. They had left the temple, but they hadn't truly escaped it. The presence of the void, of the knowledge they had barely touched, had followed them. Whatever the being had said about the dangers of the void was no idle warning. The consequences of their actions had only just begun. "Bring us to full speed," Diaz commanded, her voice sharp. She needed distance, space between them and the temple. It was the only thing that could quell the growing sense of unease in her mind. "Set course for the nearest star system. We need to get out of here. Now." As the ship began to accelerate, the pulse from the core grew more pronounced, a rhythmic throb that seemed to synchronize with the beating of Diaz's own heart. It wasn't just the ship that was reacting. The crew, too, was affected. They moved more quickly now, their movements almost frantic, eyes darting to every shadow and every flicker of light. There was something inside the Elysium, something they could not see, but could feel. An unseen presence, watching, waiting. Voss, usually calm under pressure, was visibly shaken. "Captain, it's getting worse. I'm not sure we can outrun it. The pulse, it's coming from the heart of the ship. It's inside us now." Diaz felt the gravity of his words. They had underestimated the force of what they had unleashed. The temple was not just a relic of the Virak. It was a prison for something far older, far more powerful than they had realized. And now, whatever it was inside the Elysium, its presence infecting every corner of the ship. In the control room, Tanner's hands shook as she tried to adjust the ship's trajectory, but the pulses were interfering with the systems. The energy from the core was scrambling the controls, throwing everything into chaos. "This isn't just about the ship," Diaz muttered, dread creeping into her voice. "It's in us. We brought it back with us. Whatever we awakened on that planet, it's not going to let us go." The pulse from the ship's core continued to grow, a relentless throb that reverberated through the entire vessel. The crew could feel it, hear it, in every corner of the ship. It was as if they had opened a door to something that would never close. And now, as the Elysium hurtled deeper into space, Diaz realized they had crossed a point of no return. Whatever they had left behind on the temple world had followed them into the abyss, and the journey ahead was one that would take them further into the darkness than any of them had imagined. The Elysium plunged deeper into the void, its engines struggling to maintain a course. The crew, once full of hope and curiosity, now felt the crushing weight of their choices. Diaz could feel the pulse growing stronger, the vibrations in the ship more pronounced with each passing minute. It wasn't just the technology, the pulse, it was something within them, a presence, an awareness that was seeping into their very minds. Tanner was at the helm, her knuckles white as she gripped the controls, but the ship's systems continued to fail them. The force from the ship's core was interfering with their navigation, but there was something else too, a subtle manipulation of their thoughts, as if the very knowledge they had uncovered was now trying to invade their consciousness. Diaz could see it in their faces. The crew was unraveling. The ancient presence they had awakened was becoming too much to bear. "We're losing control," Tanner said, her voice strained, barely able to mask her panic. "The pulse, it's getting into everything. The systems, the ship, the crew. It's like it's feeding off of us." Diaz knew she had to make a choice, but what choice could she make? The temple was not just a relic, it was an amplifier, a beacon that had drawn them in. And now, that beacon had been extinguished, replaced with something far darker, something that was growing with each passing moment. "We need to shut down the core," Diaz said, her voice firm despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "If we can't stop the pulse, we'll be consumed. It's too late to turn back, but maybe we can slow it down." Brandt, who had been silent for far too long, looked up. His eyes were hollow, as if the weight of what they had done had finally broken through his rational mind. "You can't. It's not just the core, it's us. The moment we touched that knowledge, it's inside us." The temple wasn't a place of learning, it was a prison. It locked that knowledge away for a reason. His words sent a ripple of unease through the crew, but Diaz remained resolute. She couldn't give in to fear. Not now. We still have a chance, she said. We can isolate the core, lock down the systems, and... A loud crack filled the room, cutting her off. The ship shuddered violently, as if it had been struck by an invisible force. The pulse from the core intensified, echoing through every part of the ship. The walls around them seemed to warp and distort, bending unnaturally as if the very fabric of space itself was being stretched. The crew staggered, struggling to maintain their footing, their minds struggling to hold onto their sanity. "What's happening?" Vos cried out, his voice barely audible over the growing sound of static and distortion. "We're not just losing control of the ship, we're losing control of reality itself." Diaz felt it too. The reality she knew, the familiar sensations of space, of time, was slipping away. The ship was no longer just a vessel. It was a conduit, a bridge between dimensions. The knowledge they had uncovered had opened a rift, and now they were slipping through it. She rushed to the command console, frantically trying to override the systems, but the pulses were too strong. The ship was not malfunctioning. It was evolving. It was becoming something else, something that mirrored the ancient temple in every way, a vessel of both knowledge and destruction. A voice, not from the ship, but from deep within her mind, filled her thoughts. The being, the guardian of the temple. Its warning echoed again. The knowledge of the void cannot be contained. It will consume all who seek it. And in that moment, Diaz understood the full truth. The temple was not just a place of knowledge. It was a test, a final trial for any who sought the forbidden secrets of the void. The Virak had failed, as would humanity if they were not careful. "We're becoming part of it," Diaz whispered, her voice hoarse. "We're not just in the ship anymore. The ship is us." The crew stood frozen, trapped between the legacy of their ancestors and the consuming power of the void. There was no going back. The knowledge they had uncovered had changed them, and now, as the Elysium spiraled deeper into the abyss, it became clear. They were no longer just seekers. They had become part of the legacy of the void, a legacy that would echo through the stars, unmarked, unknown, and ultimately forgotten. The pulse continued to grow. The ship and crew were bound together in the endless night of the void, their fate sealed by the very knowledge they had sought to master.